Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, whenever you happenstance and get whiplashed into this incredible dialogue, this truth bomb riff on Patrick Lovell, Truth Bombs the Con. I am joined by two people I respect immensely. To my immediate left, a gentleman out of Alberta, Canada, by the name of Reagan Boycheck, who I have learned and discovered initially through just connecting on social media, but over the years found out that he is just a fantastic journalist, and the amount of information that he has swirling around in his head will make your head spin. And I can't wait to see how he is going to react to the kind of scenario that we're all in the midst of at the moment, which obviously is global. But it starts in a micro sort of entry point, and below both of us, at least on my screen, is none other than my compadre, the Mighty Mouse from Chicago, leaping over tall buildings with a single bound. Ann Rabiola Miele, coming out of the corner weighing, I think, well, I don't know what you weigh, but I know you stand 4'8", and you pack an incredible punch.
3/4 to be exact. Okay.
How
Four,
much?
4'9 3/4.
Ah, you gave yourself a Trump extension. Okay, yeah, right.
Yeah.
I don't know about that. I've stand next to you. I think you're closer to 4'9". Anyway, so guys, the reason why I wanted to try to make an impromptu discussion with the three of us is that, look, a lot of things happening that seem to be the circumference of everything that we've been talking about for some time. And there's always a lot of connectivity. But of course, I'd say a vast majority of eyeballs in the United States, at least, and I am curious to see how this plays out from your perspective, Reagan, considering you are up in the Great White North, although I'm sure it's not quite white yet, but soon to be. But of course, in my backyard where I live, a gentleman by the name of Charlie Kirk, a right-wing provocateur, a guy that I might characterize as, Trump youth. And you can fill in your blanks about what that might indicate. But somebody who was very effective with an operation called Turning Point, which, as a forensic analyst, I can only imagine what the money was behind that. But the gentleman stood 6'6". He liked to have campus outings and engage people in political discussion, debate, or actually, I would say, based on a lot of the videos that I've seen, kind of a setup to anybody who doesn't really go along with the MAGA sort of, elixir. And it was really an interesting situation, but for the most part, it was off my radar. And then, of course, with a blast at Utah Community College, the largest university in Utah, I think over 40,000 students, in front of a crowd of about 20,000, while talking about transgender and gun, and I think he was talking about the actual statistics of gun deaths in the United States and tying it to transgender. And interestingly enough, I've of course heard all sorts of stats that just would blow that out of the water and just ridiculous. All things considered, when ironically, there was a gun blast and then the subsequent last 3 days. Now, within that context, in the last 3 days, we have seen media, including the governor of Utah, immediately castigate this as a left-wing lunatic that was responsible. That was mostly what it came down to. And there was a reaction, of course, predictable from Trump and everything that came from there. Instead of calling for calm and national unity and those sorts of things that presidents in our country used to do, it was more like, no, we're gonna rip the heart out of whoever did this. Now, as we can see, who did this was a young man who was white, Christian. I'm going to say probably Mormon, but I don't know all the details. I heard his father was a minister. I think his family turned him in, but I did happen to see the video last night, which I found very intriguing because I made this corollary. They had this video that Governor Cox had revealed to the world, and the FBI, of course, with Kash Patel, who's made all sorts of incredible mistakes the whole time. Not to mention the fact the news had reported that the FBI director in Salt Lake City was someone who had been there for like 25 years and was just recently fired, alongside a lot of, I think, old school FBI people that know how to do these things in and out. And then, of course, here comes Kash Patel and all of the lunacy that followed. But the big thing that most people were reacting to was, of course, this assumption that it was a far left lunatic responding, and there seemed to be gun casings and indications that trans and some other things that I'm not completely up to speed on. But I happened to watch this young man, or at least video what I perceived was a young man, even though I had at the same time had been hearing, oh, wait a second, maybe this was an inside job, so to speak. And I'll get to that in a moment. Actually, I'll touch upon that. Maybe, just maybe, that Kirk was calling for Epstein transparency, that maybe somebody might not want that to become, given everything that took place the week before with the Epstein victims, and of course, all things Marjorie Taylor Greene, and other things that we realized that I've done some truth bomb riffs about with Thomas Massey, because that connects to some information that I happen to have a lot of information about. But when I was watching the video and I'm hearing all of these conspiracy theories, so to speak, some of which were making more sense than others, especially I think it was the Guardian that had reported that there was a missing jet log, private jet, because nearby Utah State University, there is a airport, and it would have been within context that a Gulfstream or maybe a private jet or something like that with an intelligence operation could easily fly in and out. And if there was no logs, in my mind, that was like, whoa, wonder what that's all about. But when I saw the video, here's this young man, stood about, I think, 6'2"-ish, kind of reminded me of my son, to be quite frank with you. Looked like every other young man in the state of Utah, white. And it looked like he was pretty handy with a gun and escaping, relatively athletic. But to me, he didn't look like a special ops guy. You know what I mean? The special ops guys would be, like I think of Navy SEAL Team 6 or, anybody with, any of the specific services in the United States, and of course, Royal Mounted Police. And so these guys tend to be really, really like A-level type guys and all of that kind of stuff. So when I looked at him, I'm like,
Patrick, listen, you know what, Mafia, see, I think if it's a planned hit, I think of Luca Brasi. Okay. That's special ops is one thing, but a planned hit, hey, that's Luca Brasi. Continue.
Well, but so in Utah, for example, just like Colorado, Wyoming, Montana, these are hunting states. And I'm sure Alberta and places in Canada where kids grow up with guns. They know how to handle guns. They know how to shoot guns. They know how to, pack a gun away pretty quick, clean it, all those types of things. And all of those things were kind of registering in my mind. Now, we don't know if this guy was the actual guy and who was involved with him. We don't, at least to this point so far, we don't have all the answers. But there's a lot that we can deconstruct and unpack with what we know that begins with this entry point. And I want to turn this question to you after that long setup, Reagan. And I'm curious what your reaction to it is, and kind of what is the first thing that runs through your mind, and where do you go considering all of the attention that's been paying to this one moment in context to everything else that we know is just spinning out of control, really, quite frankly, around the world. Go ahead.
Well, I agree. It's really hard to make sense of something so new and so unknown, but the key to make sense of it, I think, is just to kind of back up, plug your ears to all the noise, and just stand back and look at the situation, the environment that's been created by folks like him in the media, the temperature, the culture at the moment, the polarization. Something like this is bound to happen, encouraged to happen, seized upon as an opportunity, not a tragedy. If you were looking for mass shootings for an excuse for national tying yourself in knots that happen all the time, lawmakers in Minnesota, elsewhere, but this is an opportunity. And whether or not it had anything to do with anything, we don't know, but this is the environment that's brewing. This is the sort of thing that is expected to happen, encouraged to happen. They'll turn up the temperature. It's welcomed because there's a huge financial crisis brewing on the verge here in America. And there's only a couple of ways to escape it. You can control the Federal Reserve, print trillions of dollars, keep the system afloat. You could start a war. Everything gets rewritten, forgotten, money flows like you wouldn't believe. There's new treasure to be captured. And or just a plain old financial collapse lets the elites get away with all sorts of things. So the US elite could really use a crisis to dodge things, to unite their base that might have some doubts or some conflicts. This is being used as an opportunity to unify the right. They've chosen, and that's where they want to go. They're organized, they're prepared, they're seizing on this opportunity, and folks don't know the alternative. They don't know that there's a clean new deal. They don't understand what's driving this, where, and whether or not they understand where it's headed. We know so many of them can be led to believe all sorts of false hope. It's really amazing how many people, even on the progressive side, the centrist side, played in just enough to give Trump the patina. A second administration, that is a mind-boggling achievement to convince anybody of anything, and they just dropped it like nothing so quickly. So I think if you back up, when I see things in the big perspective of America, I live in an American colony. So I have not 5 years ago, things might have been more comfortable for Americans, but it's still operating in the same sort of fashion. And what I see unfolding in America at home today is that imperialism coming home. And that's one of I think the best definition of fascism comes from the French in the 60s, that it's colonialism come home. It's the same way you deal with colored folks in the colonies is now that's how you have to deal with people at home. And the rule of law doesn't matter, and force, et cetera, et cetera. We've got some glimpses of that here in Alberta. We're a nice Western democracy, but I've found much of that happening here in Alberta over the years. It's how you steal trillions of dollars. And the game has run its course. They've written as many checks as anybody wants to buy. Treasury foreign debt is going to be tough for the US. They've made it that way. That's just a choice. Nobody elected that. Trump just started a war with everybody. And so they're driving towards a crisis. The elite needs a crisis. Sooner the better. They're the ones that win. And unless there's an alternative like the Clean New Deal, we're going to be crushed. This is a replay of the 30s. These economic policies are going to rebuild the system on the backs of citizens, of workers, of mortgage holders, of renters, of regular people. And the rich folks will have their debts forgiven, reorganize their balance sheets, trim things up, and be ready to get back at the next game. But if people don't wake up to the alternative, don't understand what's going on, where it's headed, it's a very dark path. But it being illegal, it being contrary to the way any economic system would be run by citizens, is an enormous opportunity. That it is a crime, can be stopped, and it answers the question of how we pay to fix things, because the theft, what's being looted is more than enough to right the ship, to fix the system. The ideals are there. It is an elite deep in debt, in need of war or crisis, recklessly grasping for it all over the world. And the rest of the world can see perfectly well what's happening, that there's no United Nations, that there's no sovereignty. They'll attack who they want, where they want, how they want. And so the rest of the world is trying to buy time. War is coming. The more they can delay it, the more they can prepare, the more they can set up. They're just trying not to provoke the US. And everywhere they can, the US is itching for that fight where they can take the gloves off, where the regular rules don't apply, and they can start remaking the system. And they will, unless Americans rise up, take charge of their country, implement the ideals they were raised on, because it isn't that we're so stupid. It isn't that it's just not possible. There isn't enough money. It's all right there, tantalizingly in front of us. That facade could be made real. And if we did, paying to fix things isn't even a question.
And
I will. I'm going to tee you up here, Roseanne, but I got to respond to this real quick because Reagan, that was brilliant. Wow. And I just want to add a couple of things that viewers, I hope you guys can kind of put into this, the ingredients. So in Utah, for example, we have open carry laws. And Roseanne was up here this past summer where we attended the 50501 rally where I spoke, actually, but I spoke specifically to the indivisible side of that particular day in June, right? The reason was because there was a split in Utah, and I know that this kind of happened in certain places around the country in terms of organization and what the specific initiative of an anti-Trump movement was going to take. Okay. Now, the scenario that Roseanne and I had experienced right away was we literally in real time, because of just how fast things happened at the first Juneteenth rally, we were up close and personal where the organizers of both the Indivisible and the 50501 were having a little bit of a kerfuffle about the speakers, what the agenda is, all of the elements that are going to have to try to foster a sort of cohesive a consensus building, so to speak, right? And the first thing that transpired as we began to take note of this, and again, I'm going to remind you that we have an open gun carry in in Utah, which is very much the Old West, right? You could walk into a cafe, you could walk down the street, whatever. You can have an AK-47, and this happens frequently where people have guns displayed. Now, do you think that having the freedom to carry guns in crowded places might be an elixir for something tragic? Well, of course, we all know that that's a possibility. And of course, Charlie Kirk was saying right at the moment that he got shot, call it karma, call it, really making the point that he said, and he's been on the record a lot, and I just happen to catch this. I'm no expert in Charlie Kirk, but he said, the price that you pay for the Second Amendment to have everybody have freedom to carry and open carry and all of the rest of it, people are going to die. That's the price you pay to be able to have the citizenry be, I guess, a threat to a government that's out of control. Was the intent, right? Okay, so open carry, crowds. Now we don't know what the motive of the killer was. Obviously, what I said in the open was that the big reaction is, it becomes this political polarized hot potato, as we all know. That the Nazis had a similar situation. I can't remember what year it was. I want to say it was, you guys might know better than I, but there was a prominent Nazi that was assassinated, and then the Reich brought down the house. And just basically, I think Kristallnacht happened not too long after the fact. And it just seems like it was not too much different than October 7th in Israel, right? Here you have the Hamas flying over the wall, the most highly protected wall on the planet, and yet they got over with paragliders when we saw not too much longer, 1,200 missiles struck out of the sky, right? And then the so-called, so there's a little bit of a disconnect there, but my point being is that, right, okay, so it does exemplify a potential for problems, but for what particular reason? Now, another thing I want to plug in this before you get rolling, Roseanne, is that Utah County, where this is the motherlode of financialization, okay? And interestingly enough, it's also the motherlode of tech. So Utah, over the course of the last 15 years, post-2008 great financial crisis, and I'd put a lot of this on Mitt Romney, who used to be the principal of Bain Capital, one of the premier private equity firms in the country, has become this thing where I like to call it around the country, because I'm sure a lot of people are like, Utah, isn't Utah just about Mormons? Yeah, Mormons are a big part of this, but Utah is this huge enclave now to the biggest players in tech and the biggest players in finance, because we have no regulation on either, okay? So for those of you who know tech bros, for those of you who are worried about Big Brother, for those of you who understand finance and global finance, you're all aware that all those things tend to thrive really well with no regulation. And especially if you understand our work, that it's because it's for the hierarchy, the executives, the administration. It's part and parcel to things that we've been rolling out the whole time called control fraud. But Utah County is the place of giant, Ford 350 trucks or 1500s, like these $65,000 trucks, for example. They're these beautiful houses with families that have like 7 children, and you're like, wow, how do they afford this? And I know, Reagan, you just mentioned you had 6 children. I wonder if you could put yourself in this picture, all things considered, our understanding of finance. But here is this place, literally, that is the hive of tech and finance, right? That became the stirring pot for Charlie Kirk. All of these things are manifesting at the same time, and yet all of the focus is on this place, right? This thing right here. When the entire community is, quite frankly, living what you just described, Reagan. Because all it's going to take is a run, in places like this, they're the first ones to go because they're all maxed out leverage. The whole community, right? Now, is there big money too? Yeah. But again, like everywhere else, the 1% are fine. It's the 99% that are on a razor's edge. Okay. So anyway, thank you for that. I hope I didn't take too long to describe that. But Roseanne, what's your reaction to what Reagan and I have pontificated so far?
So Charlie's all over the social media. Where do I go after talking with you earlier this morning? And then my son, where do I go immediately? I do what Reagan said. I just do it fast. Okay. I step back fast and I charge. I call it charging. The first thing I think about is I have to be caught. Okay. I have to do what I'm going to do because for the last 5 years, I have understood what you and Patrick know very well. I have been embedded my entire life in corruption. Maybe somebody in my neighborhood didn't take out a gun and shoot somebody, but what they did was they did murder someone and the judge let them go. Okay? That's what I saw happen. So for me, what's always on top that I was always in search of was a solution. The details that would stop that. And what made it all clear for me, and it gets clearer every day when I just went through 9 chapters of Zev Shalev, putting together. Oh God, it's so fantastic. When I saw the con, I had all this my world experience to bam, make the connection. That's it. I need to learn more. I need to know the details. I had been learning how the system works, really works, not bullshit works, and took my experience from working at a bank where I was making God, I made so much money because I understood what they were doing and the uh, activities between the bank I worked for and the Fed, which is like every other bank, but I was at the biggest bank in Chicago. So I knew all this stuff. Here comes Patrick with the con. Only took me one episode. But my life has been learning coupled with doing. So I can see Charlie Kirk getting killed, and I don't go to the details of Charlie Kirk. While I feel in my heart and in my head, bad shit's coming, man. Okay. What's the alternative? I don't, I know that, but I have to go right to the corruption. I can't, I can't concentrate over here. I have to focus. I have to show people my heart and my soul and my brain, and I have to show them what I do, what I have learned, how important the learning is to get to the solution to crush the corruption. Or else we got what? We got chaos, we got martial law, we got fascism, they open carry in Nevada, okay? And it makes me crazy when I see a gun in the bank, in the grocery store. It's worse than when I first came here 30 years ago and I saw a slot machine in the grocery store. Okay? That was that was really crazy to me. That was very crazy. But I always have to do. We're talking on the phone, and Patrick and I are having this great conversation, good exercise and presentation. And what do I say to him after he said it like one time? And then he's talking, and I say, Patrick, go do what you have to go. Do. Go take a shower, okay? I can't wait. This is the only difference between the two of us, okay? He takes a considerable amount more of time working out the details and the the psychological perceptives. I move. I gotta move. I gotta move. I owned a collection agency. If I wasn't dialing for dollars, nothing was gonna happen because my husband would make one good deal and then he was off to
Okay,
something else.
okay, that was awesome. Look,
So
that was awesome.
the difference. That's the only
Right.
difference. I
Okay,
gotta do.
let me ask you. Okay, do got it. So that's what we've been doing the whole time. But I'm going to ask you, what do you remember, Roseanne, when you stood in front of 10,000 people in Salt Lake City when you delivered your story about who you are and how you've been around the block? Can you sort of reminisce on that moment and tell me what comes to your mind, right now?
I started out by saying my brothers, my sisters, my cousins, mothers, fathers, that's to try to get everybody in. And they cheered. Okay.
How?
Because
Why? Because you told them you were an old lady from Chicago that came from the 60s, that you were marching with the folks that were in the crosshairs of the police during the 68 convention, and they all were on board, were they not?
when they heard where I came from, yes. Okay.
Did they want to listen to you because you're a woman of wisdom?
Well, see, and I don't see myself as that. I see myself as somebody who gets things done. And because I get things done, that's why you should trust me. If it takes a leap of faith, take a leap of faith, baby, because I ain't bullshitting you. I put my money where my mouth is. That's it.
Perfect. Now, let me ask you another question. Were you in the middle of mayhem because of open carry during the event that we both attended? What happened when you came back the second time when we were at the 50501 rally when that guy got shot?
Oh, Patrick.
You literally don't remember that? Okay, I'm gonna.
Oh, wait a minute. Wait. Oh, I'm sorry. Oh, okay. I had to go to the night. Okay. I didn't go to the night. I was thinking of the day. Okay. So there we are standing, talking. Patrick and I are talking on
We're
this,
marching.
and all these people start running. Okay. And I had just given my card and my a little elevator speech to some women, like these three women of different ages about the con and the Clean New Deal. And now we see all these people running. And I'm like, wait a minute. Like, stop, stop. That's what that's in the middle of do, we have chaos.
Well,
And
yeah.
right? And I say, stop, which is kind of odd.
Well, but that's why I brought it up because here's the relevance. Okay, so yesterday, 2 days ago, 3 days ago, whenever it was when Kirk got assassinated, it was because of an open carry situation where a guy could get up on the roof, take a shot. There was only 6 cops in the vicinity, and I guess Charlie Kirk had his own private security, but it wasn't a lockdown, right? It wasn't an FBI scenario. Let's at least we forget Doge, right? And by the way, I'm just going to make an aside comment that Donald Trump yesterday ordered the American flag to be flown at half-mast over the White House. Charlie Kirk never served a day in the military, and that's who he considers a hero, an American hero. I'll remind everybody that was on 9/11, by the way. When he did that, of which we could go on forever about Donald Trump and 9/11, but of course, who did he call a zero? John McCain. Regardless of what you think of John McCain, he spent 5 years in the Hanoi Hilton after being shot down, tortured, and everything else, not giving up information on his guys. That's who Donald Trump considers a zero, and Charlie Kirk a provocateur, and all of these other elements a hero. Okay, so that's where we are. Okay, so first and foremost, but the point being is that here is Roseanne trying to enlighten people, trying to get them to understand we have a plan to destroy corruption because we have it. We need people to understand that. This is what Reagan said from the outset. We're not fly by night. We're not hyperbole. We've got tens of thousands of hours in this. We have millions of dollars. We've worked with the top flight people that are experts, both in the system, outside of the system, the top journalists. We have information that goes on forever and ever and ever. And it literally spans probably, when we talk to people like Reagan, centuries, quite frankly. But really, the last 40 to 50 years with detail about everything that has made this moment what it is. And so when Roseanne gets into a kerfuffle about, you've got to listen to me because I know the truth. You need to trust me. Okay. Some people are the type of people that feel and they want to connect with somebody who knows the way. This person knows the way. I need answers to questions. I'm going to follow her because she's convinced me because she knows. And I'm going to follow her. Now, people like me, someone says that to me, I'm like, well, what do you know? I need to know what you know. And so here we are turning back to Reagan. Reagan, what do we know?
What I know, I learned from Patrick about banks. And what that led me to discover is the secret of the world. The secret of the last century, the secret of what's happening right now is an absolutely suicidal marriage between oil and banking. When oil is combined with banking, it's a free lunch. If someone will lend you money printed out of thin air for you to dig up oil, which you then burn, taking advantage of all that stored energy, and repay the loans with the revenue from selling the oil. You have that energy. You created credit from a bank. You repaid it with the revenue of someone else's property. You got the energy out of it. That is a disastrous, dangerous situation. And before the Great Depression, before the crash of 29, that's a big part of what brought down the American economy in the 20s, is that marriage of Wall Street and oil, and the small independent oil companies put an end to it. All of the reforms of the 30s separated. They talk about what the real separation is: oil and banks. And that created a situation where there could be stable growth in America. And from the 30s to the 70s was the period of the greatest growth, the consistent, you don't have a recession ruining everything. Things really start to add up over a long period of that. And in 71, what happened was oil and banking were reunited. With the end of the international gold standard, oil became the new collateral. Not just gold, not just the physical capital of factories and such. Oil, for the first time since the 20s, became legal collateral for money creation. And when the US, though they don't like to admit it or talk about it, is an empire. You control places like Canada and Alberta that have a lot of oil, which you don't pay for, which Canadian banks will print $100 billion a year out of thin air and give to you Americans. And you'll put it in your pocket and say, thank you very much. And you'll sell the oil, and then Canadians will dig up oil tomorrow, sell that, and repay the banks that handed the money to American shareholders. This is what is the free lunch. That's the timing, the good period of the 30s to the 70s. The increasing financialization we've seen since the 70s is the increasing use of oil reserves as collateral for private money creation. Allows the people holding those licenses in Alberta, they're Americans. You installed the premier in the 30s and he handed out licenses to all of our oil for free. So Americans hold these licenses. They can go to the bank, borrow money, put it in their pocket, dig up the oil, repay the loans. They've walked away with trillions and trillions of dollars. And so this is new in the world of banking. It's not just gold, it's not just capital, there's oil. And it has the power dimension of it. And when you compare it, it's free with banking. And so for 150 years, imperialism is about oil. It's about controlling those sources of oil, combining it with financial, and that has been the game. And in the world, Alberta and Palestine are the two pivot points of the control of the main sources of oil in the world. Palestine is the landed aircraft carrier in the middle of all the rest of the oil that everyone has their finger in. Every European player, they're all fighting. It's really, you're never going to own it all. It's a battle, but you can police it. Alberta is tucked up way up here in the middle of the continent. Nobody can get to it. It's all ours. And the premier we installed gave it to us all for free. So when we combine that with a bank, it's incredibly dangerous. Incredible source of trillions and trillions and trillions of liquidity created out of thin air, spent with abandon by these billionaires. That's where they come from. And either they make something that lands, sticks, lasts, or it fails, they go bankrupt, wash their hands, start again. But each world war has been premised on the control of this oil. World War I started with America seizing oil in Alberta and Mexico. The Ludlow Massacre in Colorado was a big spectacle And it was also the cover for the U.S. Marines invading an oil field in Mexico and seizing that oil field. On the eve of World War II, they seized a Mexican oil field. At the same time, they came up to Alberta, where some lawyers had just discovered oil. The Rockefellers sat down with them, made them a deal, and took control of Alberta's oil. On the eve of World War I, the U.S. immediately seized the oil of Alberta and Mexico. And something very similar happened in World War II, where the U.S. was rather friendly with the Nazis and the fascists in Italy. And leading up to World War II, there was a lot of talk about staying neutral, minding our own business. This hemisphere is ours. You guys do whatever over there. All of it slowly, quietly working with the British Empire to transfer Canada and many other colonies in the late 30s, right before, gave complete legal control of the oil and the regulator in Alberta, leading up, coaxing Germany, hoping they would attack the Soviet Russia and destroy themselves, luring them into it, making them think it was safe enough. And the moment they did, they take the mask off, join the fight, and crush Germany. And I would argue that we're at a similar period again today, where we're approaching World War III. It's being mostly waged on the American side unilaterally. And there was another coup in Alberta. We've had periods of independence where there's been resistance, and we've had local independent premiers that have developed Alberta in the interest of citizens here, but those have ended. And the Americans reasserted control in October 2022, installed a new premier here in Alberta. So they once again have control of this oil. And the day on January 6th this year, just before Donald Trump came in for his second term, but on the anniversary of his insurrection on January 6th, not only did the Prime Minister of Canada resign to make way for the Goldman Sachs central banker that replaced him, but the Premier of Alberta, who'd been installed by the Americans, also announced, to the surprise of everyone, that Alberta was going to double its oil production. We had another 4 million barrels a day we were going to offer up to the Americans. That was our gift to the emperor. And so I think that's the proper frame and perspective to see blowing up boats off of Venezuela, all the posturing, armada there. We're on the eve of World War. We have all this oil sitting here. The Monroe Doctrine wasn't a joke. The talk about Greenland in World War II, this is how it was the facade. Germany invaded Denmark, and immediately the question of Greenland came up. And so Britain, America, and Canada were all, what do we do? What do we do? Does it go to a European power? And the US wanted to make sure everyone understood the Monroe Doctrine was the Monroe Doctrine and it was going to survive. And so they finagled and just amongst themselves made a show of it, that just to make the point in April 1940 that the Monroe Doctrine is real. Greenland, it's a colony. Well, it's ours. Don't even think about owning it. And that was the cover. They could talk about Greenland. And in August of 1940, Canada signed a formal treaty in Ogdensburg, New York, in front of 100,000 American troops. We signed a treaty permanently subjugating ourselves to the Americans, and that's why you steal all our oil. And when you combine that with Wall Street and the banks, it's a disaster for everyone but the billionaires. But that's where all those jerks came from. It's Alberta oil. That's what's going on. And Patrick happens to know all the folks at the Department of Justice who brought these folks down when they were using oil as collateral in the savings and loan debacle and since. And so not only do we know what they're doing, we know the people that not only can stop them, but have stopped them. And the loot is more than enough to fix whatever problems we might have.
Wow. Well, actually, you guys do love baseball in Toronto. I don't know if that, in your hockey province, obviously, of Alberta, it translates, but you just stepped up to the plate and dinged a grand slam there, my friend. I thought that was amazing. And what I was reminded of, a couple of things, interestingly enough, is a guy I like to call, a prophet, the David Byrne, who always says, same as it ever was back in my day, right? Because this stuff tends to step and repeat, quite frankly. But it gave us the undergirding of the structure of global power. And I was reminded, incidentally, of Franz Ferdinand, from the standpoint that, we're talking about all of these ambitions and all of the way that the powers kind of, divvy up the world and how they do it and what imperialism is. And when you look back throughout our history, especially with some of the resonant tones of what you laid out by way of imperialism, especially as it relates to, well, I'll connect this, obviously everything with the British Crown and the Canadian territories. But you mentioned your latest prime minister is, of course, another Goldman acolyte, and Goldman has its people throughout Europe. I mean, it's literally, everything from England to France to Germany. Everybody has some sort of connectivity to Goldman, which is extraordinary given what you just said, because what people need to understand, in addition to this kind of complexity, and then I'm going to circle back to the kind of the task at hand and tee it up for Roseanne to bring us home, is that Reagan is an expert now more than ever because he was inspired by a lot of the revelations. And this is how it works, I think, in media today, because we're all so interconnected. We provided information that triggered something in something that he was already working on and had been really for decades, that leads to this pronouncement, which I believe was validated to a degree by a fellow Canadian that I interacted with recently, a gentleman by the name of Paul Jay, who delivered this kind of, and I was reminded of you, this incredible synergy of the Rockefellers. Because not only were the Rockefellers involved with getting their fingers in all of Alberta oil and what that means for the globe, and then what you've discovered, particularly after 9/11 when we invaded Iraq, and ultimately how that paradigm that you mentioned paid a lot of the future financing of what became the collapse of the American middle class, quite frankly, in the housing market and everything that went down because of the 2008 great financial crisis, which is where we intersect. And of course, as I just mentioned, Goldman is the paradox on top of it all, the giant vampire squid. And there's more, of course. But at the same time, it is amazing how we were able to get to this global paradox based on the global paradigm that just ruminated from, the news and the frenzy of a 24-hour spectacle of a assassination of a guy who was saying that, yeah, of course, there should be no regulation as it relates to guns, right? There should be no regulation, people, as it relates to oil, I suppose. We'll see how great that works, right? All things considered, just to kind of make too fine a point. But to tee you up, Roseanne, and to share the facts and the nourishment of what drives you and sustains you and what you've done your whole life as a deliverer of truth. And I like to tell people you're some sort of combination of Mary Magdalene meets, and I always mess up her name, the Mother Teresa, right? But yet in this powerful sort of persona of this Chicago, Popeye Mighty Mouse, that's a lot to take in. But when we talk about the Clean New Deal, what registers for you, given everything that we've already said, in terms of A, problem, B, solution?
The solutions exist, as Reagan said, and we know very well, during the S&L crisis, Bill Black and his folks took down 1,700 pretty big fish, made 30,000.
7,000 of the most elite, by the way.
Well, they made 30,000 referrals, correct? And how many were sent to jail?
7,000.
7,000 were sent to jail.
That's a recent revelation, because we always knew that it was in that banality of what you were talking about initially, but it also included the FDIC. There was more than just the savings and loan stuff, but it wasn't middle level guys. It was all the top level guys.
That's right. So, but the point of Bill Black and the savings and loan crisis, and now the Clean New Deal, the law works. The law doesn't work when you have corrupt people in the system. And it's always strikes me one guy. One guy can say this, FDR can say that. He wanted to get into war, of course. All the things I've read. But it's like one guy. One guy. What if Alan Greenspan? What if FDR? What if this one, that one? One guy said no. Okay. And we were talking yesterday.
I'm gonna offer one guy who said no. His name was JFK.
Okay. And what happened to him? Okay. But even though he said no and got killed, that never dissuades me from promoting what I have learned in the Clean New Deal. Because if it has been done before, just like corruption has been done over and over and over and over before, we can solve this. We will never eradicate evil completely. It's not going to happen. We're imperfect people. I get it. But I will not spend my life saying, here's the new boss, same as the old boss. I will not say that. And I stood in front of Pete Townsend as the piece of his guitar flew past me. Okay. Concerts were different then, my friends. I will not, which is what forces me into the do phase. Look, I'm not looking for shortcuts. I've spent 5 years and counting, and I will continue. I rewatched The Con. I rewatched the new Untouchables. I watch all the truth bombs. You've got to, it's not that you have to remember every detail like Patrick does. You have to suck it in. It has to be under your skin. It has to be what you live. And the solutions are possible. And I am not going to accept the new boss, same as the old boss. You know what we have in Nevada on our ballot? You can vote for none of the above. Is that wild? Is that wild? None of the above. Where does that power go? Where do all where do all those votes go? Why can't we simply have ranked choice voting and you have people of integrity and courage that aren't in any party? Fuck the parties. I'm sick and tired of the parties. Okay. The solutions are there. I'm honest. I have integrity. I'm not just blowing smoke. I have no, I've put years of skin in the game, and I will continue until I cannot put any more skin in the game because the solution exists. That's it.
And
Amen.
the solution is the Clean New Deal. Reagan, were you about to say something?
I want to agree completely. And I have very similar reasons what motivates me and inspires me and takes away all of my excuses is the example of Bill Black. That this stuff is complicated. Nobody understands it. These people are powerful. Nobody ever touches them, except Bill Black did. A whole bunch of political stars aligned. It was a moment, it was an opportunity. Thousands of people went to jail. They proved this is possible. It can be fixed. And if you didn't know that and you don't know Bill Black, you would never believe it. You would never believe you could touch these people. You would never believe they could go to jail. And from that, I've discovered someone similar here in Alberta that offers the same sort of inspiration, that the realization that you're an American colony, let alone times are about to get really tough and you don't want to be under a boot when things get ugly. Besides that, it's really hard to accept and just to come to terms with that. But the Alberta I grew up in wasn't part of that colony. In 1971, the grandson of one of these imperialists, a senator, carpetbagger, media baron from the 1890s, Grandpa Lougheed, was part of this imperial plan to absorb Alberta into the next empire. But his grandson went to Harvard and tutored under a coal magnate and learned how the game worked and came up under it and started a new political party and won power, won independence from the American Empire in 1971 and took away all that oil 1 week after the end of the gold standard. 1 week from the Powell memorandum about the class war that was going to be launched in return. That's when the savings and loan crisis came, when you had to start financializing your own oil around Chicago, in Texas, in California. It all happened where the oil was because you lost Alberta. And I can't find any Albertan here who's willing to admit that we're a colony or willing to admit the laws that are on the books or to face the facts of how things work here. But Peter Lougheed proves that's possible. If we just elected a leader that enforced the rule of law and ruled in the benefit of citizens, we could. That's the Alberta I grew up in. We had a really decent education system, a decent society, built hospitals, paved roads. That's a place I grew up in. But by 1985, a string of assassinations had forced all those independent Canadians to resign office. And we slowly absorbed back into the American system, watched that disappear. And so times look really dark today. Except I know Bill Black exists. I know this can be done because it already happened. However you think or imagine, it's proven, it's done. And the same thing is true here in Alberta, that while he lived a long life, he never said a word about any of this to anyone ever, never gave the slightest hint about any of this throughout his life. But the fact that he accomplished it in the 70s, when the world was a much more dangerous place. There were no international friends of China or Soviet Russia, Soviet China. There was no BRICS. There was no international community. But Albertans committed were able to achieve independence, to capture that surplus from the oil, to use it for domestic development. And so, however unlikely it might seem today, however far away that seems, it already happened. And the same is true in America with the Clean New Deal. And they're still there and they're still fighting just under the surface. And this is the moment of truth. The crisis is upon us. And it can go two ways. The other side, they have their martyr. They have someone to rally around, somewhere to flip the morality, someone to unite. But Bill Black is that person for the rest of citizens who want a decent life and a decent economy and a future, is the rule of law. This is just imperial residue. This is the royal prerogative. These are sociopaths who have very good reason to believe that they won't be held accountable to the law. The way you bring them to an end is you hold them accountable to the law, because none of this is merit-based. It's one giant crime that citizens will pay the cost of unless they smarten up, act like citizens. Bill Black proves it's possible. Peter Lougheed in Alberta proves it's possible. And it's needed now more than ever. It's simmering just under the surface. People are ripe. Things could shift dramatically. And you guys have been laying the groundwork for years and years and years, and everyone is still in the game, still kicking, thanks to all your work in between these two financial crises, that we're going into this crisis with Bill Black's team assembled, organized, engaged, But now we have an algorithm editing all of our media and making that more difficult. We just have to find one way or the other around it. But the potential for an explosion is tantalizing.
Well,
Can I
I
can I
love
say the fight platform, what fight stands for? Bill Black has, think of the word fight, FIGHT, equals fearlessly ingenious, great-hearted, honest, and tenacious. That's Bill Black's explanation of fight.
and he's
And
all.
And
right?
we all have that in us.
Yep. But I want to finish off with this, because what you described in many ways is the way I was taught. It was the history of the world, Reagan. I mean, it's always been about resources and, right as might and all of these things. And the only thing that, led to liberty, or at least the notion of it. And it just always reminds me of Game of Thrones, because at the end of Game of Thrones, after all of the horror that we saw through 7 seasons, at the end, what's his name had proffered, hey, do you think we ought to open this up to a broader sort of democratic solution? And all of the powers that be were like, yeah, good luck with that, right? The fictional depiction of what were the powers that be, the oligarchs, the kings, the things that just have lasted forever. We're human. This is part of society. But the law and liberty and justice, of course, need I remind everybody, from the American Revolution through the Civil War, through the war on fascism, civil rights, and now it's our turn, because a couple of things have just blown my mind the last couple of months, right? The United States is descending into third world chaos because we have an idiot as the mad king. I don't think anybody, even those on the right, except for those that are about the level of Trump and below, but of course, the technocrats and the wizards that are playing for the billionaires that run the oil and the financial game and everything else, yeah, they all know that Trump is a complete freaking idiot, right? And so anybody who knows that, do you wonder why Trump is in the position he is? The answer is, or the question is rhetorical. The answer is self-evident. And what we've seen the past few months is South Korea literally held their carnage of corruption accountable. We just saw it yesterday. The Brazilians, of all people, are now holding Bolsonaro accountable, 27 years in prison. We'll see where that goes. I'd like to see him in prison. But, I mean, for what? For storming their capital, their Congress, breaking the law. I mean, what did happen on January 6th? People, what is the Supreme Court of the United States right now? It's a tool of the billionaires that are feeding from this trough of this global oil construct that has delivered the world that we live in really since World War One. I mean, it's been a battle, but World War II in this current phase, right? And so a lot of you might be watching this and going, okay, I get it. It's intriguing. I've learned a lot here, but I still don't know what the Clean New Deal is. And I'm not going to spend an hour to describe what the Clean New Deal is. What I'm going to tell you is it's the answer that you can find at www.thecleannewdeal.org. It helps if you understand the work, the con, at thecon.tv, because that's the blueprint for how this works. Unfortunately, it's half of what we got because we got quashed by the system of international oligarchs and billionaires that have been there in our system for the last 4 decades, and also interacts with stuff that developed Trump, by the way. I'll just say that because of the work that you proffered, Roseanne, based on Zev Shalev, that we'll go into more detail later. But for those of you who can start with the Franz Ferdinand sort of analogy with Charlie Kirk and what could be, the other side of what, both of my friends and my colleagues have suggested here, it's the truth. It's the force of light that can blast through the deception of lies that put together the solution. Because for every problem, there's a solution. We know that. There always has been, and there's always going to be problems, and there's always going to be solutions. This is probably the grand Shakespeare mega comedy tragedy and God's what actually. Well, I could go on and on. It's the great comedy. It's the great comedy is what I'm thinking of. But the Clean New Deal reveals to you the largest racketeering enterprise in the history of the world that never ended. That is our system that stole tens of trillions of dollars from you and me and everybody you see because they could, because they were surrounded by the complicit and the corrupt. It's what ended Rome. It's what ended every empire in the history of the world. It's going to end us unless millions of you become foot soldiers, quite frankly. And this is really the only peaceful way. Sorry to use a war metaphor, but this is the only peaceful way to go get a hold of this out of control descent into chaos and madness is if, to Reagan's position, you elevate those who know how the system's supposed to work, who have the integrity to make it work, and work within the system to hold the bad guys to accountable. You got to ask yourself, America, if Brazil, of all countries, can do it, what the hell is going on with the United States for those of you who've lived around a couple of decades? That once Brazil was one of the most corrupt places on earth. Now they're stepping into the wheel to say no, democracy matters because they already lived through the corruption. They already know what happens when the corrupt get complete control. They're fighting back. And go ahead.
And if they can do that in Brazil, in the South, that they're fighting back, there's an exact parallel between Bolsonaro in Brazil and Alberta. American foundations funded trucker revolts, truckers laying siege to the parliament in Brazil and Canada, in Ottawa and on the Alberta-US border. At the same time, the same right-wing American foundations were funding trucker sieges in Brazil and Alberta that were launched just as the Russian invasion of Ukraine started and were used, and that's supposedly the powers that forced Prime Minister Justin Trudeau to resign on January 6th, is the pressure from these truckers, anti-vaccine, right-wing, et cetera, movements. And there's an exact parallel between what was pushed in Brazil and what was pushed in Alberta. That same premier remains in power, promising to double oil production here in Alberta. In Brazil, Lula's back in power and Bolsonaro's going to prison. What excuse do us Albertans have for not being able to hold our leaders accountable the way Brazil is? That's another example of them taking away all of our excuses. If Brazil can do it, why can't Albertans? And the answer is, we can.
And of course we can in the United States. And I think what I just heard from you, in addition to, I think, a great analogy and information, but it's like this whole thing is engineered, guys. You don't think these people behind the scenes with, incredible resources can't hire incredibly smart, capable people of writing algorithms, owning tech bro operations, owning the financial apparatus and the energy apparatus to do what? Become the pharaohs of today? That's what we're talking about. So it's the grand symphony. It's always been this way, but what side are you on? If you want to find a pathway forward to turn the tables on corruption, to defeat and, basically destroy the misery of tyranny, to unleash the renaissance of possibility, then you must become a nuclear reaction vector to the big bang of truth that we're dropping. So sorry to end with a universal construct or a very violent one, depending on your outlook there. But the long and the short of it is light can't overcome darkness with the power of the supernova. And that's who you have to be, my friends. So enough platitudes. Thank you guys for the time. Thank you, my friends. Thank you so much, Reagan. Great to see you as always. Roseanne, we talk all day, every day. Can't wait to keep the ball rolling. Please like, subscribe, and share. Check out thecon.tv and, of course, thecleannewdeal.org. All the best to you guys. Take care.